Hello and welcome to the Flipping and Wholesaling Houses in New York show. I'm Michael Pinter, where I teach you how to start flipping or wholesaling houses or properties in New York, or if you're already doing it, how to grow your business. Now, I got a question about wholesaling multifamily residential. The truth is, I had a meeting last night, someone asked me about it, and then someone again asked me about it today, but MFR. I don't even know what he meant for MFR, but MFR means multifamily residential. So first, let's talk about what SFR is, single family residential. And really, that means 1 to 4 families usually. Now, wholesaling a 1, 2, 3, or 4 family is basically the same, and that's mostly what I do. Now, there are advantages and disadvantages to working in the multifamily space. So, multifamily space is really more than 5 units or more, or there's also commercial. But let's talk about multifamily residential for today. So the big advantage when you wholesale multifamily residential is that anytime you go to contract in New York or anywhere, it's accepted that there is a due diligence period where you're going to have to do some due diligence and look into a lot of legal paperwork, like the leases of the tenants. You want to verify the expenses. These are things that take some time. The bigger the deal, the longer the due diligence period. Smaller the deal, the smaller the due diligence period. So that's an advantage, because that's really how single-family residential works in other states, that when you go to contract, you have this due diligence period or inspection period. And during that time, you can go try and find a buyer and see if this deal works. And if it doesn't, you can get whatever deposit you gave back, and you can walk away from the deal, right? That's how a lot of gurus teach this, is that this is a risk-free situation because you can always get out of contract. In New York, it doesn't work that way for single-family. All inspections get done before the contract, and once the contract is done, you have no way out as a buyer unless you have a mortgage contingency. Okay. So that's a huge advantage in wholesaling multifamily residential. Obviously, another obvious advantage is that it's a much bigger dollar amount, so there's more room to make money and things like that. Now, the disadvantage in working multifamily residential is that, A, the way properties are valued for multifamily or commercial is not based on comparable sales. It is based on capitalization rate and net operating income. So let me explain what those things are. First, net operating income, or NOI, is the sum of all the rents minus all of the owner's expenses. Also subtracting, you also have to subtract a vacancy allowance, assuming there will be some vacancy. That could be 10%, 5%, and also management fees. So you come up with a net operating income number, an NOI number, and then there's a capitalization rate, which is sort of a multiple. So the idea of a cap rate is that if I don't take out a loan on a property and it has net operating income of $100,000, the property has a valuation of a certain multiple of that. So let's just say so if I bought the property all cash and I wanted to get a 5% return, so if a property had $100,000 in net operating income and the cap rate was 5, which means I would need a 5% return, it would be a $2 million property, right? Because 2 million times 0.05 equals 100,000, or 100,000 divided by 0.05 equals 2 million. So you've got to understand. So I remember when I was in the mortgage business, I used to get a lot of calls from people who had another disadvantage. Another disadvantage of it is that closing costs on commercial loans are significantly higher than residential closing costs, because very often lenders don't differentiate between a $700,000 loan and a $7 million loan. So what happens is you have to pay a large legal fee to their attorneys that represent them in New York. You have to pay a large title fee to the title company that's going to insure it. And sometimes you need also other searches, like environmental searches, which are not common in residential. And those can be thousands and thousands of dollars. So let me go back to what I was saying. When I was in the mortgage business, I used to get calls a lot for mixed-use properties. So let's say a store with 2 or 3 apartments on top, on a busy commercial street in Brooklyn, mostly in Brooklyn. I did them in other areas also. But what happened almost inevitably is if it was a small loan, $500,000 loan, even $1 million loan, the deals wouldn't close, because when they got the estimate of the closing costs and it was $60,000 or $70,000. I mean, there's mortgage tax in New York, there's all kinds of things, plus all the fees I just discussed. Very high appraisal fees, many thousands of dollars, very high environmental charges, points to the lender. It was cost prohibitive, right? It didn't make sense to refinance a property even if the value had gone up. But also, that was one problem. The other problem was that people were looking at comparable sales. So like, the building next to me just sold for $2 million. But the net operating income on the one that they were calling me about was like, $40 grand. and it just didn't make sense. There was no way it was going to support that. Now, the reason why it gets valued that way mostly is because of the lender. The lender is going to come up with that valuation to give you a number that they're going to lend you. So, and the cap rate is also subjective, right? Let's say a general cap rate right now, which I think is absurd, is 5%. It's five cap. But if a lender thinks it's a crappy area, they're gonna put it at a higher cap rate. If a lender thinks it's a super area, they might give it a lower cap rate. So, and that's how the appraiser is going to come up with the valuation, and that's how the lender is going to use that valuation. So it's important. It's really important because that is how they come up with a value, right? You may say, well, I think it's worth $2 million because a guy bought a similar property to it, but it doesn't always work that way, right? And people would call me and they'd say, well, I own the store, so the store brings no rent. I live in one of the units, so that brings no rent. That changes things, right? Some lenders will give you credit for what the market rent will be, but some lenders are going to be like, if you're an owner-occupant, I'm not giving you credit for that rent. And therefore, the NOI, the net operating income, is much less, and it is complicated. Another thing to absolutely stay away from is rent control and rent stabilization. I can tell you that there are two big issues with that. Number one is I actually almost bought a portfolio of buildings in Hempstead, New York, which is an area I do a lot of business in, that had rent control and rent stabilization. And I had never been really familiar with those laws, right? They're mostly in New York City, very rare to have them in Long Island. And when I really got into it, it became a humongous pain in the ass because you have tremendous liability if the previous owner, the owner you're buying from, screwed up on his rent calculations and overcharged people. They can come back to you 10 years down the line and sue you for it. So I hired an attorney to look at it, and he was like disgusted. He said, this guy does a terrible job, and I didn't buy it. That's the first problem. First problem is you're getting into legal issues that are usually way deeper than most people are adept at. Number one. Number two is they changed the law in New York about 3 years ago, where you can't raise the rents on rent control, rent stabilized apartments like you used to. You used to be able to make improvements and then charge a proportion of that in addition to the rent. So you can move things slowly up towards market rent over time by redoing the kitchen, by making improvements. Can't do that anymore. So it's complicated. A lot of values on rent stabilized, rent controlled apartments have gone down because of that law. So it's complicated. Now, another disadvantage is you're really playing in it with more, what's the word I'm looking for? More resourced players. So that, like a company like Fairfield, if you're in Long Island, Fairfield went around and bought almost every multifamily that exists. They certainly did that by paying a lot of money. You and I can't compete with Fairfield, right? They raised billions of dollars and they spent it. So it's important to understand that you're in an area where people who are people have a lot more money, a lot more resources than you are competing. So that's something to be concerned about. Also, a lot of owners of multifamily residential are using this as their main source of income, right? So there's usually little motivation, even if the property is being mismanaged, and even if the property has much less income than it should have. For them, it's whatever, it's $50,000 a year. So they don't really, it's tough to find more motivated sellers in the multifamily residential market because most of these people are using that as their piggy bank, and to give them a multiple of it, even if it's 10 times what they're getting monthly, what they're getting annually, they look at it as well that I'm killing the golden goose. So it is certainly a more difficult area to operate in, but there are better payoffs to it. But you need to understand that, and also there's something called cash-on-cash return. So cash-on-cash return is really important. Cash-on-cash return takes into account the debt service, how much I'm going to borrow. But those things are related. The cap rate and the valuation and the NOI, all that is related because how much cash you're going to put in is going to be the remainder of whatever the bank's not going to lend you. So if the bank is figuring out that this property is worth $1 million, you think it's worth $1.4 million, and they're only going to lend you, let's say, 70% of that, you're going to have to put a lot more cash in than you thought you would. And that affects your cash-on-cash return. So cash-on-cash return is a very good measure of these things. It's probably the best measure of them, but it's really dependent on how much you're going to you're going to be able to borrow from a lender, and that's dependent on the net operating income and cap rate. That's what I know about multifamily residential. Again, I own a 7-family, and it's an interesting thing. I didn't wholesale it. Bought it, it was a disaster. I had to renovate the whole thing. Now, I hope this was helpful to you. If you have any other questions about this or any other topics, please put the comment in. If you are interested in all the ways I can help you, go to howtoflipnewyork.com. If you are interested in the course I have that teaches how to do what I do, go to howtoflipnewyorkcourse.com. That's howtoflipnewyork, COURSE. If you're interested in finding out more about one-on-one coaching, go to coaching.howtoflipnewyork.com. Oh, I had a coaching student I got to call. And If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe. If you're watching on any channel, please click the thumbs up, and please keep the comments coming. I go live 5 times a week. I don't always know what to say, so your comments really help me. You can ask any comment. It doesn't even have to be about the video you're watching. If it's a simple answer, I'll just reply. If it's something I've covered before, I'll send you links to the videos, and if it's something new, I will do a new video on it. So thank you very, very much for watching.